Because that starts to tell us, aha, here's some places that we might be able to start to shift around, because this belief is actually caused by another belief. And that belief is something that we might be able to either shift around a little bit, or we could find out what's the evidence and cause for that. And that's another thing to recognize about beliefs, is that sometimes they come in little chains. There's a thing called a belief system, which means that these little buggers travel in packs. And, you got to watch out for that, because one will get you from behind while you're doing this one. And, sometimes it can feel like that. Gee, there's one belief coming this way and one this way. But it can also be of value to you, because you might find that if this belief is caused by that belief and that's caused by that belief, if I change this one, whoosh, everything else shifts. Let's take one more example of a potential limiting belief that either you have or a client or somebody has. Yeah.
I believe that because I don't have the killer competitive instinct, I can't really be great at tennis.
Okay. Now here, one of the things you hear here is that she's actually stating the cause. Because I don't have killer instinct, I can't be good at tennis. Now what's missing here is what? The evidence. Because, now listen for the language. I can't be good at tennis. That's a judgment word. That's a value word. So what we want to do is to say, how do you know that? How do you know that?
Mostly because I don't really get so involved in winning, and so I don't really win that often.
And so I don't get involved in winning, and I don't win that often. So there's two pieces here. Because I don't get involved in winning, I don't win that often, that means I'll never be good.
Because people have told me.
Because people have told you. Now we're getting down to it. The lost performative. Good. Yeah. So, now that also leaves us, so there what we have is a statement that because I don't have killer instinct, then I'm not so interested in winning, and people have told me that means this, and so I'll never be able to be good in tennis. Again, that gives us now relationships that we can start to refine, challenge, work with. And I think one of the things to realize, of course, is that if you're going to change a limiting belief, one good thing to know, one good thing to have in the background is what is going to be a more positive belief. Because the purpose of sleight of mouth is not to win arguments. It's to create more options in beliefs. And that's going to be what we're going to do with these statements. But what I'd like to have you do is to first just get used to thinking in terms of causes, effects, and meanings, so that when you hear beliefs, you can start to tell, this person's defining a relationship, and here is an entry point. I can challenge this, or I can challenge that. By the way, in standard meta-model parlance, this would be complex equivalence. This means that. And that's the thing you can challenge as well. Just like this is cause-effect. So this is what you call complex equivalence. By the way, let's go the other direction. People here are being very nice and stating, I believe this. Now, people are not going to always put it in that structure so you can go, this must be a belief, because they're calling it that. A lot of times they'll say, I need to have killer instinct. See, they're not telling you the rest of it. So if they go, I need to have killer instinct, you want to say, well, what would happen if you did? What would happen if you didn't? That's what, when you challenge those things, that's what their purpose is. Okay, so if somebody goes, I must win in tennis, you might say, well, what would that mean? Or what would that cause? So people are not going to always be able to put it into a belief statement. For the purpose of this exercise, I think you can just easily preface it with, I believe blank, and then have people ask you the question. By the way, I suggest that you kind of just pick something here. Don't think it out ahead of time and figure out all of the things. It's very interesting to have people ask you these questions, so you have to figure it out, because sometimes you won't know an answer, whether it's limiting or whether it's positive. So, here's what I'd like to have you do. Get into groups of threes. One person will state at first a resourceful belief, positive belief about yourself. So when that person states a positive belief, person number 2 says, how do you know that? Once you got that answer, person number 3 says, what makes it be that way? What makes it that way? And then put down your answers. And then pick a limiting belief, person number 1, and state it. And person number 2, you say, how do you know that? Person number 3 say, what makes it be that way? And then switch roles so that each person gets a chance to elicit information about both a positive and a limiting. By the way, as you can already, if you compare, for example, with Oliver, since he gave us both a positive and a limiting, you also start to find some interesting things. For example, his limiting belief had a different kind of evidence than his positive belief, didn't it? His limiting belief was, well, I'm not good at this because I don't have an interest in it. And that comes from another belief. Whereas his resourceful belief was, I'm good at this because I have sensory evidence, which comes from an internal state of caring. Now that also tells us some interesting things about what might be resourceful ways of approaching things for Oliver. Okay. So, check the time here. What I would say is, if we could be back, this should take maybe 5 minutes or so a person. So if we incorporate 5 minutes for getting together into groups and another 5 minutes for getting a cup of coffee, then I'd say this should be a 20-minute exercise and we'll be back in half an hour.
Before you all go away, one of the things you need to think about is there's this wonderful pool outside. So you can go sit around out there. You can sit in here, and there's 2 lobbies that you can also utilize.
So we could be back at roughly 11:45. Okay? And then what we'll do is to go on and say, what do we do with these beliefs? How can we start to influence them, strengthen them, or refine them? Okay. See you then. First, I'd like to find out if there's any questions that came up or lacks of clarity or anything like that that you needed to get clarified before we go on. Harold.
I had trouble simplifying it down to cause, effect, and meaning, because if I ask, how do you know that? And then when I ask, what makes it that way, that kind of opened the door to
for another thing.
Belief, and it's like, how far back when did it change?
Yeah, well, okay. Well, first of all, that's a good question. And of course, his question is, what he found was, when he would start tracking back, what causes this, he'd get another belief statement. This was caused by this other belief, which then you could track back further and further. And remember I said these little guys do travel in packs. So his question is, well, how do I know when to stop? Well, that's going to depend upon where you want to go with it. If it's a limiting belief, you're going to track it back as far as you need to open up some space so that you can work with that. And that's something that we'll be exploring in our next. That's kind of the place I want to go next anyway. If it's an empowering belief, well, I think what you're going to want to do there is to track it back enough that you can figure out what are all the supporting beliefs that somebody has to have to build that one. And that can sometimes be an important factor, because if I want someone to believe this, but this is is based on presuppositions of this, then I'm going to have to start back on these earlier ones. And so the answer to the question, how far do you track back, is you track back as far as you need to go in order to accomplish the task that you're after, the goal that you're after. And that we don't have enough information yet to